Hello, friends. We are back of episode 220 of the Our Weekly Highlights podcast. That's a nice little even number to keep us going here. We are now entering February, and that could not come soon enough based on a pretty rough January across many different levels. But we're here to keep you happy with some great content about the highlights that have been shared on this week's Our Weekly issue. My name is Eric Nance, and I'm delighted that you joined us from wherever you are around the world. Cold, warm, whatever have you. Hopefully you're comfortable. And speaking of comfortable, I'm never comfortable unless I have my co-host virtually right here. That's my awesome co-host, Mike Thomas. Mike, how's your February going so far?
It's off to a hot start so far. As I mentioned a little bit in the pre-show, I did probably more vibe coding in the last week than I've ever done before, trying to resurrect an old shiny app, and actually is going pretty well. We'll see. More to come.
That is exactly a case I have to start my vibe coding adventures with a project that will help our weekly, actually. So I'll be learning with you along the way on this. So that's good stuff. And what else is good stuff here? Well, that's the issue itself. And as we all know, if you've listened to the show before, this is a human-centric, curated, set of resources with a bit of automation to help us with RSS feeds, but this is very much a human-led effort. And our curator this week is Jonathan Carroll, another one of our OG members of the Our Weekly team. And as always, he had tremendous help from our fellow Our Weekly team members and contributors like all of you around the world with your pull requests and other wonderful suggestions that are sent to us. So yes, we are definitely not the only podcast in town that centers on data science, especially on the art side of things. As we've talked about towards the end of last year, Posit has spun up their own podcast. It's both audio and video form called The Test Set. And this is a great showcase of brilliant members of the community and their takes on issues in data science and their particular workflows. And their most recent guest was one that we, Mike and I, are very big fans of in her work. Emily Riederer joined Michael Chow, Hadley Wickham, and Wes McKinney in the most recent episode 14 of The Test Set. And they covered a lot of ground here. I'll just talk about a couple of things that I took away from it, and Mike, you can share what you saw. Yeah, Emily has a lot of experience with SQL back in, you might say, the early days of SQL, and seeing how both the R and Python communities have built some wonderful tooling to help make that intersection of data science and SQL a lot easier for those getting started with it. But there was definitely more than a handful of moments from both Emily and Hadley and Wes where they would just wonder why a lot of this tooling just wasn't there sooner. But better late than never, I guess. They also shouted out a tool called dbt, which I know Emily's been using quite a bit. It's kind of like a way to give functional-like programming to SQL coding and using best practices in software engineering to do that. Again, something that when you learn SQL for the first time, depending on where and when you learned it, you may not know about this stuff very much. There's just a lot of interesting tooling around SQL, and obviously with the explosion of things like DuckDB, we're seeing even more being shared in the broader data science community with respect to this tooling and extensions along the board. And then there were other topics explored, such as, like inevitably, the use of LLMs does come up from time to time and how that might help your SQL adventures. But one thing that I definitely resonated with is the idea that it's great to say you want to get started with these, LLM agents, these services, vibe code your way through things. It's another thing to actually see how people do that. And that is something I think is a big unmet need across this spectrum. Heck, we've already touched on our weekly recent package that was looked to be vibe coded of sorts. We didn't see how they did it. We just saw the end product of it. You might learn a thing or two just seeing how people leverage things like Claude Code and whatnot. So that might be something that hopefully some people will take the baton on, so to speak. But overall, yeah, some really nice insights here. Very much a panel-like discussion. But as always, Emily, I'm very impressed with her wealth of experience. She also touched on her thoughts on imposter syndrome, which is something that I very much still deal with to this day, but she was very upfront about how she's been able to conquer some of that. And the fact that the art community, to be fully biased here, was one of the leaders in shedding that and making this a very welcoming community to share what you learn and sharing it out loud. And Emily's been one of the forefronts of that. So, yep, great listen, and definitely anything that Emily gives for advice, I'm first in line to look at. Mike, what did you think about Emily's appearance on the test set?
I'm a huge fan of Emily and the podcast as well, and she was a big inspiration for my talk on building multilingual data science teams at PositConf this past year. And she's been at the forefront of really using the right tool for the job and not being afraid to mix and match tools between Python, R, and SQL. She's also been on a lot of different sides of data science in terms of her roles at Capital One, which really resonates a lot with me. Data analyst roles, some data engineering work, package development and tool building for others in the organization, and I think data science management roles as well, which she walks through a little bit in the episode. There's a lot of DBT discussion. So if that is, something that you're interested in learning about, I think there's a lot of great nuggets about how Emily leverages DBT and some of the problems that it solves in her workflows. And I think Michael Chow talks a lot about it as well because he has some experience with DBT. And, one thing that's interesting to me is how LLMs are so good at generating SQL from text right now. Given that I would think that there's kind of a lack of training data in places like GitHub. I feel like SQL is notoriously not version controlled in the same way that Python or R tend to be. Yeah, yes. I've been on a lot of projects working in SQL Server and, trying to find a way to link that up into a Git repository. And there's just really not a good workflow, unfortunately. But obviously, I think SQL has a lot more ubiquity and history in the data world, so I'm sure that compensates for it, along with the fact, that Hadley mentions in the episode that it's about as pretty close to English as you could get in terms of a programming language, that does ETL work. So bottom line, I think if you're someone who uses, SQL in your data science work or is interested in maybe sort of the polyglot data science approach, there are so many great tips in here that Emily and the rest of the hosts offer. So it's a fantastic listen.
Yep, couldn't agree more. And like I mentioned earlier, these ideas of, in this new age of leveraging assistants to help us with these journeys, it's becoming very real if it wasn't already, and hearing what they say about that. And again, this can go off the rails for some people pretty quickly if you do too much at once, but I'm confident that learning from Emily's journey and a lot of this, along with, being grounded on the fundamentals of these pillars like SQL, that's the kind of stuff that will help you in the long run in your data transformations, ETL journeys. Just managing all this in and of itself is a skill that often takes a lot of experience to leverage effectively. And there have been some services that try to give you that Git-like workflow for database or data structures in general. I still haven't found one I'm truly happy with, but maybe someday that will be a solved problem. You never know. And what is one of those fundamental tools that if we don't have this in our software engineering, even data science workflows, we're probably in a world of hurt? I'm talking about version control, of course. Every single time I mess something up, this is what saves me from having a complete catastrophe, as well as, maybe this is my take on this, my commit messages often act like a diary of sorts in my development journey. And a lot of times when some person asks me, how did you build feature X? And I'm like, gosh, that was a year ago. What did I do? Go back to that PR and go to the commits in that PR. And then I realize, I used that package. I used that thing to do that fancy screenshot of an HTML widget. Ask me why I know. I literally just did that this morning. Fancy stuff. Nonetheless, Git as we all well know, can be pretty intimidating to someone new to the world of version control, because there's a lot out there. There's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of good resources out there. But sometimes you just need a helping hand in knowing where to go and what are the fundamentals behind Git itself. And that's where our second highlight talks is coming to us from the Our Ladies Rome group, who just had a virtual workshop called Git and GitHub Practical Version Control for Data Work. And again, tailored to those of us in the data science side on how to get started with this effectively. And this was a recorded tutorial. The link we have in the show notes, as always, has a link to the recording on YouTube, as well as the materials themselves. And this was led by, I believe, the organizer of Our Ladies Rome, Federica Gazzoloni. Tried my best to pronounce that. But she has done a terrific job with the materials as well as the recording. And I did a peruse through some of this to see what were some of the nuggets here. She really lays the fundamentals really well. Even something that I take for granted. If I say the words terminal and shell, do most people know the differences between those two? And my venture to say, if you're new to this, probably not. But even things like that are important as you think about, well, if I'm going to interface with Git on the command line, what is the terminal? Well, that's the window where everything is. But you could have different shells in that terminal that may not be helpful for your Git experience. We know Bash, of course, is one of the default shells in major systems. Maybe you're a fan of Fish, ZSH, who knows what else. And there's lots of different ways you can make your shell better for your Git experience. That's just one aspect of the fundamentals. But going through the slides here, she talks about the origins of Git, which was authored by Linus Torvalds, because the Linux kernel itself, in his mind, didn't have anything appropriate to manage the complexity of the Linux kernel, so he had to build it himself. And luckily, we're all to benefit from it. So it's always good to see that, yeah, Git wasn't exactly built by a data scientist or statistician, unlike R itself. So again, that may illuminate some things about why Git works the way it works. But she also talks about the benefits of this, which I've touched on a little bit. But really, it's making sure that you are up to speed with some of the key concepts. I mean, not so much the commands, but the concepts behind this. And also where you can host this in a more online platform. GitHub, for example, gets a lot of press here in this workshop. But also there are other ones out there too, like GitLab, Git if you want to self-host this thing. Lots of others as well. Codeberg's another one that's getting a lot of attention. But she has this great set of roundup of what it's like to do things locally versus pushing it to remote, interacting with a remote repository. Some great little images here about what it's like to fork a repo, what it's like to push and pull. And a lot of these are with hands-on exercises throughout the workshop. So that is really great hands-on, kind of short but to the point materials here. And anything marketed to the type of audience that may not come from that software engineering background, these are things that I think we need more of. And I'm happy to see Our Ladies Rome did a great job in putting these materials together. Also, I want to shout out, not in this resource here, but Mael Salmon's awesome post about Git in her journey and her package, which I can never say correctly, superploit or something like that, to help you practice Git from R when things go haywire. Because if you want to practice things going haywire, you don't want to do that on that production project. Trust me. Ask me why I know. Not that it's ever happened before. Wink, wink. But there is a lot of great things to digest here. And like I said, the slides are great. The little PDF here of the different basics of these commands is great too. Because it's great to have a GUI interface on top of Git. But sometimes you got to go lower level with things that the GUI does not expose. And that's where having those, at least the basics, and practicing with that. I always shout out things like branching, things like staging when appropriate. These are things that are a little bit outside the norm for a typical workflow. but boy, they can save you a bunch of time if you do things wrong or you need to fix something really quick. So great resource here. I invite you all to watch the video if you're new to version control in your data science workflows, and great to see another top-notch Git resource enter the highlights this week.
Yeah, I always appreciate folks willing to help beginners learn Git. I remember Greg Wilson, who's kind of a legendary software educator,
Yes.
I believe helped found the Software Carpentries, saying one time that he has taught a ton of different programming languages in his day, and in his opinion, Git is by far the hardest to teach others. And Federica does a phenomenal walkthrough here of the basic Git commands, which, if you know 5 or 10 of these Git commands, they essentially get you everything that you need to do by far. So I'm not sure if you looked at Federica's slides, Eric, but the Linux Penguin is on the title slide, so I figured you'd love that. And the public Canva deck that she has put together is absolutely beautiful. It's phenomenal. Great diagrams, great styling, very accessible for folks. And sort of just as a tangent here, Git is the most important skill that I hire for. And if you're looking to land a data science job, I can't recommend learning Git enough. There's plenty of candidates out there who have a sort of beginner use case, Jupyter Notebook or something like that hanging around. But if you can actually show your progress through that project in Git commits, I think it'll go a long way. And conversely, if you are evaluating potential employers, I would highly recommend that you ask them if they use Git in their data science work. And it may save you a world of headaches. Just my 2 cents. But a phenomenal resource here that Federica and our ladies have put together. And I really can't understate, I think, how important teaching Git to others who are up and coming in their data science journey is.
And this is another case where as you're learning this and you feel like you've been able to, learn something new, this is where, if you do have the time and the project in mind, this is a great chance for you to put that project on GitHub. Make sure you can make visible that great data science analysis you did. Maybe you built a Shiny app. Maybe you've done some other interesting work. And then you can put a blog post with that and literally walk the user through that development journey. That's going to go a long way to, if you're new in the market, especially in this age where it's hard to get the more entry-level positions because of certain things out there. It's good to have this portfolio available. And again, I'm saying this as somebody who has practically little free time these days. But back in my early days, I didn't know about Git as I was looking for a job, and I just had to hope for the best that I could talk my way through my dissertation research and hope that was enough. But now with this stage, you can do a lot of novel things, and you never know where that leads, ever, ever. And on both sides of the fence, as you said, Mike, this is something I look for extensively if I have to partner with somebody, to use the business lingo, a resource to help with a given project. Eric here don't have time to train a renderer that I pay a lot, or my company pays a lot of money for, on the basics of version control. That is a must in my type of work, but also within our in-house, support of our statisticians, of our data scientists. We are actively trying to find ways to get people started right effectively, and that's a two-pronged approach. Just getting Git working, period, is sometimes not trivial in and of itself, right? I mean, that's why we have books like the Happy Git for the R user by Jenny Bryan, right? I mean, that helps an R user get up to speed really quickly. It's another to then, once you have Git available, once you've seen that it's available in RStudio or Positron or whatnot, what do you actually do with it? And that's where this workshop, amongst the other resources we shared on our weekly over the years, I think is a major win compared to when I was learning the good old Subversion back in my early days. And if you had to go through that, you have my sympathies. But it's a new world now. But Git is going to be fundamental in a lot of this journey. And yes, if you are using that LLM agent to help you with things, you better version control your stuff beforehand before it goes completely off the rails. Again, I don't have as much experience on that front of it, but I know people who have that have lost a lot of things because they thought that vibe coding solution was just going to get it right. Not always, my friend. Not always.
Nope. And I know things like Cloud Code now, you can give it access to Git and let it make commits for you or create branches or probably delete your repository if you're not careful. So it's fantastic that they can leverage that tooling, but you still want to have the knowledge around Git to make sure that you are coaching that Cloud Code or similar tool into making the sort of correct decisions for you along the way.
Yep, that's where there's almost a new skill set in and of itself to teach these agents the best practices with quote unquote skills that are out there that I'm still, learning about. But in the end, the skills in your noggin as you're listening to this are very important as you're learning the ins and outs of version control. And again, you can practice this on just about anything before you turn the reins on that next production kind of analysis setting. And if you did listen to last week's episode of our weekly highlights, we, at least me personally, I was super impressed by one of our highlights that was called Futurize by Henrik Benson, which served as what is known as a transpiler between the way you do a typical lapply call or whatnot, and then taking that base construct, literally transforming it on the fly to the future ecosystem type of code, so that the end user doesn't really have to think anything else other than use that function called Futurize. That's not the first attempt at transpiling things, right? I mean, if we think about translating from one syntax to another, we've had, because of the developments in the dplyr ecosystem, ways to help translate our code built with dplyr into the SQL code within packages like dbplyr, for example, right? Well, this is a new one here. What about actually having a Rust-based transpiler that can do this from any arbitrary SQL code and then put it into practically any modern database? Yes, this is real, and this is our last highlight today. This was shouted out by the Descindo blog by Novica, but he's not the author of this tool. This tool itself has its own GitHub repo, which we'll put to in the show notes as well. And this is called the libdplyr transpiler. The author of this is Chanya Park. And I did look at the GitHub repo a little bit. I have not tried this myself, but after recent experiences, I am looking at the sidebar contributors, and I do see there seems to be at least a bit of help from an AI agent on some of this from AMP code or whatnot. But I digress. What is on the tin for this libdplyr transpiler? And again, this is if you're coming from the world of R and you know how to run that dplyr filter command, that mutate command, and you're comfortable with the pipe operator to do that, this is where you can take that pipeline code that you would do in a tidyverse-like pipeline, such as selecting two columns and then doing a filter. You pipe that into libdplyr, and it's a command line tool, and then you will get then the SQL syntax straight there if you like. So that's what the author Chanya says here about the usage, that it's a CLI tool first and foremost, but if you are in the Rust ecosystem, you can use it as a Rust library if you want to do something clever with, say, your connections to, say, Postgres or DuckDB or whatnot, because DuckDB is one of the supported databases. And then what's supported in this transpiling? A lot of the major dplyr operations are supported here. So we got select, filter, mutate, rename, arrange, group by, summarize, and the family of joins, and also the kind of set operations as well. There is support for aggregation functions as well. So it seems like it's definitely on the right track. I admit I'm pretty comfortable with, the things like dbplyr and whatnot, and more recently the dplyr packages on the DuckDB ecosystem. If I'm going from R over to, DuckDB directly, I tend to be comfortable with those packages. But, if you want a very fast transpiler that you can fold in multiple places, seems like libdplyr might be worth a second look. So just when I thought transpiling was, we were done for that, looks like we got another round of it in this week's highlight. So yeah, intriguing tool, and curious what people will use it with.
Very intriguing. Opens up a lot of maybe other possible similar implementations of, collaborations between R or Python and DuckDB. I wouldn't often think of sort of going this direction using R code that's going to get executed with DuckDB. I would think more, as sort of Novica starts out in the blog post, thinking about, kind of going the other way and having your R or dplyr code execute, SQL, I guess, under the hood. And the directionality here is kind of throwing me off. It's a little interesting. But, that being said, I think going that other direction is, I think, much the benefit of the non-standard evaluation that sort of dplyr has underneath it that allows us to build things like dbplyr and duckplyr and all that very, very quickly. I think this is a really interesting project that you can try out yourself, although I believe at the moment it's not currently working. There's an issue out there. I think there's a plan to resolve it, or at least it's not working on the latest version of DuckDB. So more to come on that, and hopefully it gets resolved here pretty quickly. It looks like Novica himself, the author of the blog post, opened the bug, and it's already being worked on by the author of the package. So we will see. And, I think one of the very neat things about DuckDB, which is obviously different than a lot of legacy SQL tooling, is this open source aspect of community extensions that you can build on top of DuckDB and allow it to really expand and take advantage of sort of, the tenet of open source software, in that we can extend these tools to, all sorts of different use cases that, just the developers at a single company may not have the capacity to do. So we love open source in this podcast, love DuckDB, and great to see folks building on top of it in packages like this libdplyr tool.
Yeah, and like I said, that extension system, it's not like they're the first, database framework to have this, but I feel like they kind of struck at the right time and the right awareness and, the first-in-class development onboarding to build these extensions. I do watch a lot of the DuckDB videos that are posted on various conferences or meetups because I just can't get enough about how very performant it is. And just this community around it is really, exciting to me. So I just got a new batch of videos that were downloaded on my server this morning from a recent conference, I believe, that I'm going to take a look at. I don't know if this one is mentioned here, but yeah, this is just one of many extensions in this ecosystem. Like you said, hopefully the bug gets solved for it being installable on the latest DuckDB release. But this is, again, a great place where it just showcased that whether you're building this tool like this one here in Rust or other frameworks, the DuckDB, community, the DuckDB, maintainers are welcoming these extensions across different aspects. And I know there's a great set of extensions with respect to spatial analysis and other ones that can be really complicated in a lot of database workflows to see what happens. So, yep, I think it's just another example of the kind of new tooling that we're going to see in this space, especially with assistance from certain agents out there, and hopefully they get it right. But at least here, it's all open. The version control history is there if you want to peruse all the different steps that were made in this particular extension. But with that, there's also a lot more to this issue of R Weekly. it's never just the highlights, right? We got a bunch of additional resources that we don't have time to cover today. And we'll round out this episode here with a couple of pieces of feedback that kind of came our way in different ways. And for this one that I'm about to shout out here, this is an example of when certain accidents happen in the world of tech. It's hard enough to build all these platforms, but sometimes things goes a little unexpectedly, especially when it comes to security. And I want to really shout out Jan Cohen, who messaged me directly about a potential leak in some of our resources associated with our podcasting platform, hosting platform called Podhome. But Jan shared this with me responsibly. Once I saw the issue and I could replicate it on my end, I was able to get in touch with the Podhome folks and they solved it right away. But in this day and age, there are just some real bad actors out there that when they see something vulnerable, they probably want to take down an entire service. So Jan, I really appreciate you contacting me directly on this. And you could have done something nefarious, but no, you chose the high road and we got it solved. And that is very appreciative, especially as I depend on a lot of tech to do this very show, along with many other things I develop. Not everything is picture perfect, right? But sometimes if we can get them solved, and I'm happy to, help developers out there with what I see as well. There's a right way and a wrong way to do this. And yeah, you did it the right way. And kudos to you for helping me out and helping Podhome out at the same time. So again, shout out to Yan, and also shout out to Barry and the team at Podhome for solving this within 12 hours of me reporting it. So we're alive and well on our weekly here, thanks to the community here. But Mike, you got some good feedback too. Why don't you shout that out?
Sure. I definitely want to thank, first and foremost, Simon Couch for the shout out on Blue Sky and LinkedIn. It seems like his and Sarah Altman's post has resonated with a lot of folks in the data science community over the last week, which, really comes as no surprise given what an excellent blog post it was, regarding their research into LLM's accuracy of interpreting charts. So thank you very much to Simon for the shout out. And I'll maybe make one last shout out. The RISC conference agenda, which is being hosted by the R Consortium, is now out. And somehow I am the first presentation of the entire conference right after JD Long's keynote.
That. So, setting the stage, buddy.
Tune in on February 18th and 19th, and I'll at least be out of the way quick.
You're going to be the toughest act to follow after that one, for sure.
I don't know about that, but it looks like a great lineup for folks doing risk analytics work.
Yeah, and there are many of you out there, and I know, Mike, that's a huge part of your daily, customer base and your daily workflows. So yeah, we're really excited for you, and I'll be sure to be watching that virtually and see what you're up to there. And Mike's famous for many ways here, right? He keeps this show going, but you know what else keeps our weekly going is you and the community, and that's where we rely on your pull requests for new features, new highlights, new blog posts, insights, podcast episodes. Who knows? But they're all ready for. We're ready for you, as they say. We're a pull request away. Back to that GitHub conversation. If you can be comfortable with GitHub, there are many novel frameworks out there, both community-led and tech-led. That if you can be comfortable with GitHub, you're going to have an impact. And this is one of those projects. So how do you get in touch with us? With the project itself, it's at ourweekly.org. Just bookmark that. Make sure to check that out every Monday morning or so, because we'll usually have a new issue out by then. And then our episode comes out shortly thereafter. And if you want to get in touch with us, there's a great few ways to do that. We have the contact page and the episode show notes of this very humble little podcast here in your podcast player of choice. We are also available on the social medias out there. I am on Blue Sky with @ourpodcast at bsky.social. I'm on Mastodon with @ourpodcast at podcastindex.social. And I'm on LinkedIn. And again, you can find me pretty easily there, like Yan did, and search my name and you'll find me there. And Mike, we know you're getting ready for the RISC conference, but where else can people get a hold of you?
I am. You can find me on Blue Sky at mike-thomas.bsky.social, or you can search Ketchbrook Analytics on LinkedIn, KETCHBROOK, to see what I'm up to.
Good stuff. And as usual, I'm sure you left in a couple sound bites here that might get clipped later. We'll find out. But we're going to clip this episode here to end here. We got our day jobs to get back to, so we appreciate you all tuning in to episode 220 of the Our Weekly Highlights podcast. And we will be back with another new episode of Our Weekly Highlights next week.